The World Economic Forum has published its first annual social mobility study. European nations score highly, with Denmark top of that list. Now, Singapore is in 20th position, the most socially mobile in Southeast Asia.
And we're also in the global top 10 when it comes to access to education and quality and equity of education. So let's discuss this with Dr. Walter Theseira, Associate Professor of Economics at the Singapore University of Social Sciences. So, okay, first, explain the term social mobility, but from an economist's point of view.
Well, I think social mobility is about overcoming the accident of birth. The evidence suggests that rich parents tend to have rich children, poor parents, poor children. And this is a great shame because there are many children born to poor parents who have great potential. It's just that they cannot unlock their potential because they don't have access to education, the same kinds of social networks, referral to good jobs. So I think social mobility is about making sure that we maximize human potential in society so that no matter what your accident of birth is, you have the same opportunities to do well. That's what social mobility is about.
So the report gives some key factors that are necessary to create that social mobility. We've got health, education, technology, work, protections and institutions as well. Do you think that these are these are fair?
Well, I think any one index can't capture all of the conditions for social mobility, but what's interesting about this particular index is that it does cover a lot of areas that research identifies are helpful for helping promote human capital and therefore unlock social mobility. Because I think what's most important is that whatever potential exists in people, the conditions are there to try to upgrade people's potential and basically help them move up in society. The other very important thing about the index is that it captures social protection. And that's important because if you come from a less privileged background, you really cannot cope with shocks in the workplace very well, whether that's unemployment or health shocks. So that's why it's very important for society to step in to help you out there.
All right, speaking of these indexes, Singapore's low unemployment rate gave us actually a high score in terms of work opportunities on that particular index. But why didn't we do so well on fair wages?
Well, fair wages measures the distribution of income in society, and I think it's not a secret that Singapore has quite an unequal income structure. But I think there are really two issues here we have to think about. First question is, can we ensure that as a society, no matter where you are on the income spectrum or ladder, you have enough money to live a decent life, you have enough money to ensure, resources to ensure that your children can maximize their potential. And I think we're doing a lot here, but this index does not directly measure or capture that. The second issue is, given the income distribution you have in society, can you restructure that without hurting the economy significantly? And I think here the big risk is, our economy depends very heavily on internationally mobile high-income earners, people in the legal profession, business services, and so on. So the problem here is the tech industry. So the problem here is these people are in high demand globally. So if we push too hard there, they could leave Singapore and go elsewhere, and that would be bad for all of us, including lower-income earners. As for the low-income end of the spectrum, what's important there is making sure that people have opportunities to increase their wages, but it can't outstretch the market. Because if that happens, then people are going to lose their jobs, and that would be even worse. So I think we have to keep working here.
There's plenty to do, but let's take a closer look at some of the scores that Singapore got. Because it's ranked, in that ranking for education, it had 83.7 in education access, 85.8 in education quality and equity, but that's an A. How much better can we go from there?
Well, I think it's important to point out that Singapore actually came in top when it comes to the performance of our students, so we should be proud about that. At the same time, one area where we did not score so well in was diversity, meaning that in the Singapore education system, we tend to see a pattern whereby students of the same socioeconomic class tend to go to the same kinds of schools. And that's perhaps not a strength of our system. And I think we could push more on inclusivity there, but we have to make our schools more inclusive without losing our performance edge.
Well, yeah, we are obviously going towards that. But the most socially mobile societies are in Europe and Nordic countries, specifically. Right. Denmark scored very high. What examples do you think Asian countries can learn from them?
Well, I think in these Nordic countries, they've got a history of very strong social protection, but that did not come about overnight. They have what you might call a more welfare state approach, but that comes about with a strong social consensus that people are willing to pay high taxes in order to provide a high degree of social protection. The important point is we cannot import that kind of policy overnight. If we don't have the social consensus for sharing the burdens more equally and paying more taxes for that, then I think that kind of policy will fail. People will basically vote the government out, right? So I think what we have to do here in Singapore is we have to look at the gaps we have in society. We have been improving over time our social protection, our healthcare coverage, our retirement support for people who don't have enough money in retirement. And I think there's room to do more there, but that can only come about if we're willing to take the case to our fellow Singaporeans, argue for why we need to pay more as a society to protect people. But we have to do that gradually and with a social consensus.
So indeed, this report coming in quite timely, lots to do there. But thank you so much for coming in and giving us your perspective. We've been speaking with Dr. Walter Theseira, Associate Professor of Economics at the Singapore University of Social Sciences.